Hi, I'm Katie von Holzen, IASCL's Media Coordinator. Today, I have with me Professor Brian MacWhinney, a renowned psychologist and linguist who is known for his extensive research on language acquisition, psycholinguistics, and cognitive science. His influential competition model proposes that language learners activate and compete among multiple linguistic representations during the process of learning a new language. He has also developed various software tools, such as the Geologist, the Child Language Data Exchange System, and TalkBank, which are widely used by researchers to collect, code, and analyze language data. He is a professor of cognitive psychology at Carnegie Mellon University, where he is also the director of the university's cognitive science program. Brian, it might be surprising for you to hear that you are the director of Carnegie Mellon's cognitive science program when there is no director. That might be because I asked ChatGPT to help me write up an introduction to this interview, and it originally included several inaccuracies, such as that you wrote the book, A Multiple Process Theory of Language Acquisition, although I think that that's quite similar to your paper, A Multiple Process Solution, the logical problem of language acquisition. And perhaps most surprising of all, although I think that you could be a candidate for this, that you've received the American Psychological Association's Distinguished Scientific Award for the applications of psychology, although you have won IASCL's Roger Brown Award. Actually,
I have a couple other awards. They're all related. It's like a collage of different things, they kind of paste together. It's like what they do in art, they just kind of take a little piece of this, a little piece of that. And
extrapolate,
and then you're supposed to believe it.
Nonetheless, the language produced here was entirely grammatical.
Fine.
So ChatGPT and other large language models are currently intensely debated in linguistics, psychology, and cognitive science in general. And so my question now to you is, what, if anything, can ChatGPT and other large language models tell us about child language and how children acquire language?
Yeah, well, actually, I think it's the other way around. I think that children can teach ChatGPT how to improve eventually. But ChatGPT basically is, scouring the web for lots of sequential dependencies that make sense. And it is able to do that, through these transformers and attention and everything, which is great. And I think it's really brilliant. Probably our brain has some capacities of this sort itself, but if that's all we had, we'd be in pretty bad trouble. One of the things is that so I think that we learn a little bit about one of the functions of the brain, which is this very statistical property. What we don't learn about is the more functional side of the brain, where we actually learn through meaning that is grounded in experience in a social world, and this is just not happening with poor ChatGPT. It's a little bit of a caricature of one of our processes that we do use, I think. Yeah, but it's interesting, and I think we will hopefully go the other way around, which is to start to give machines more ability to contact the world, for them to have more sensation, using their video, using images, not just still images, but moving images, so that they can start to ground themselves in things that are actually closer to what the child is getting.
Well, let's take an even further step back to your bachelor's degree, which is from UC Berkeley. You completed it, I believe, in 1968, correct?
Bachelor's I completed in 1965.
Oh, 1965. Okay.
Yeah, right.
Longer ago. So you
probably got something else from ChatGPT, right?
No, I was going off my memory on that one. So your BA degree is from UC Berkeley in Spanish rhetoric and geology, but your master's degree is in speech sciences, and your PhD is in psycholinguistics. I was curious whether there was ever a chance that the world would have had Brian MacWhinney, geologist, instead of Brian MacWhinney, professor of psychology.
Yeah, there were a couple reasons for that. One was when I was doing my field geology in the Berkeley Hills, and I remember all the poison oak I got from that. I had to, making my maps on the geophysical map of the hills, and you do the strike and the slip of all the faults. It was great. It was fun. I loved it. I put that map on my car and went inside the house, and someone came out, and when I came out, someone had stolen my map. So I got a D in the course, even though the professor knew that I had been doing the work all along. So I decided, I'm going to do geophysics. So I went into geophysics, and I did really enjoy geophysics. And then something happened with the thing called the free speech movement. So I got really involved in politics and the anti-Vietnam War. And the idea of going to work for an oil company in Saudi Arabia suddenly seemed very uninteresting.
Yeah.
So, it was a time of great political upheaval.
And I do think that the field is better for you making the switch over.
Yeah, I don't want to. And I have friends who did go down the other way, and they said, well, I spent my life basically destroying the earth.
Yikes. Well, I have a follow-up question to that that's a little bit related. So in a recent interview, one of your answers about emergentism caught my eye. So you said that good models for how to think about language structure come from sciences such as evolutionary biology and even geology. I found this intriguing. And so I was wondering how geology can lend a good model for how to think about language structure.
Yeah, I really, really think biology is the closest. I know that some of my colleagues in cognitive science like to look to physics for examples. And, there are things to learn from physics, but I like to think of language as a biological process, really. But at the same time, what is really great about geology is the idea of being able to look at all the time scales. So when you go, you can actually look at the rocks and you can see, oh my goodness, this is when the comet fell, and destroyed the dinosaurs, or this is the process of the slow movement of the continents, the continental drift. So you can really see the effects of a rapid change, of a sudden volcanic eruption, or of the comet, but then you can see the slow actions of erosion. And I think of that really is nice because, of course, there you really have the record. And with human life, we also have a record in video. I like to think of our ability to track humans across. Now we have this study like from NYU, the PLAY study, where you can follow children in their homes across a year. People are recording, these dense recordings, and you can see minor changes and how they lead to major changes as the accumulation of events. And then sometimes there's a big event that occurs and the child learns that falls off the bed. So I think that time frames that we see from the geological record, of course, are very instructive, but we can think of the time frames that are happening in the child's life. And then, of course, in our social life, in the changing of the language. So, really, I like to study child language, but I care really about where does language structure come from? Mm-hmm. And it comes from all these different forces that are operating at different time scales. My favorite example of this is the horloge in Prague, in the city square there. That beautiful clock where the Turk and the figure of death and the soldier come around, and every few hours they revolve around and strike the bell, and everybody goes clap, clap, clap. All the tourists love it. But actually, all this was built, back in the 1400s to have the lunar period, the rising, the setting of the sun, the movement of the zodiac are all coordinated with each other, all these different time frames. So I like to think of time scales as operating at, in different ways, but interlocking with each other. And that's, I think that language is eventually coming from those different scales that are operating.
Mm-hmm. And that's maybe something that our members will be able to see at the next Congress when we're in Prague next year.
Oh my goodness, that would be great, won't it? Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
So one of your current projects is elaborating emergentist approaches to language learning and structure, or that is, going beyond formal descriptions of language to describe how language structures emerge. So what are you currently working on to further emergentist theories?
Well, I think the thing has, well, the most recent thing was a paper that I wrote with Catherine Caldwell Harris, and it's really focusing on the stages of second language acquisition in terms of trying to understand whether how far we want to go with this notion of critical periods for second language acquisition.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, there's also the critical period for first language acquisition, and that, we don't want to talk about all the horrible experiments that were done there. But really, if we look at second language acquisition, and I should say that one of my big interests is trying to understand the difference between first and second, whatever the answer might be. And of course, one answer was the critical period, but I think we found more and more that a lot of these age effects that you see in second language acquisition are due to changes in the social structure and the motivational structure that people have. The young child really has no alternative but to learn language. If they don't learn language, I mean, they can't get what they want.
Mm-hmm.
So it isn't so easy for them. They we say, oh, they just learn like a child will learn. Well, children struggle for years, and their pronunciation is still very inadequate, even at 6 and 7. So there's a lot to be said, and of course, then adults have problems too, and don't want to, and they have the problems with entrenchment of their language. All of these are different time scale things. That some of it has to do with the time scale of your interaction with other people. So children are really being supported by their parents on a continual basis. And some cultures even more than ours, and sometimes they're supported by their peers or their brothers and their sisters. But then there's also the problem that you get when you're older, that you have to, answer all your emails. You have to, go teach classes, and you have all these other responsibilities that make it more difficult to pick up a second or third language. And of course, eventually you get older too, and your hearing goes down. So there are all these different time scales that are working together to either make it so you do learn language well or don't. And there's just so many influences. So I think the notion of critical period, there are some biological forces, I'm sure, but we've never really pinned them down, and they're much more plastic than people have recognized. Well, it's coming out in Brain and Language, and there's going to be commentary, and I'm sure many people will disagree with me because many people still believe in the critical period. And yeah, we'll find out.
Okay, we'll check that out.
Yeah.
I'd like to switch gears a little bit and talk about one of your contributions to the field that started a few decades ago. So the field of psychology has moved towards adopting more open science principles over the last decade. And this has definitely been on the rise in child language research through different kinds of initiatives like Many Babies and some databases like WordBank. But our field already has I think, very strong history of open science work spanning several decades back to at least the 1980s. So in 1984, the John D. and Catherine T. MacArthur Foundation supported you and Catherine Snow to develop Geologist, as I mentioned before, the Child Language Data Exchange System, which I believe is the earliest open science initiative in child language research. So first, I'd like you to tell us how you came up with the idea for Geologist.
Yeah, it is fun. We had a meeting. Dan Slobin had organized a meeting in the Max Planck Institute in Nijmegen, and we were trying to understand cross-linguistic effects on things such as reference, deictus, different aspects of language development. Dan was really interested in cross-linguistics, and I was too. I thought I'd just been working on acquisition of Hungarian, which is my mother's background, and we were running off. Everything was off of these paper, files that we had of transcripts, right? Trying to understand what children were saying. We're reading these, sheets of paper, often mimeographed, with notes on the side. it occurred to me that, gee, wait a second, we have this new thing called the IBM PC. This is time, this is way back when, sort of the time of the Commodore and the IBM PC. But we could enter these things ourselves in our, at our office, and we could type in these things, and then we could share them with other people. And partly this was really came about from work that Roger Brown had done. I remember when he had the study of Adam, Eve, and Sarah, I got a copy of all of those transcripts. And Roger had made 12 copies. 12 copies. But that was data sharing at that time. Mm-hmm. And we really thought, we could do better than this. So it was really partly it was Dan's idea at that time, and partly my idea. And then we didn't do it, for a couple more years. And then we had a meeting of the MacArthur Foundation, and, everybody was, well, look, they want to give us money. They have to have an idea. If you won't give us money unless you have, well, how about a data exchange system? And Catherine said, that was my idea too. So there we were, and we said, great, let's do it. And
but I'm sure it wasn't always easy, right? It was a great idea, and I think we've all benefited from Childless and the kind of the spin-offs that are under the TalkBank umbrella. But I'm curious about the challenges that you faced in making Childless accessible for other child language researchers.
Well, yeah, I mean, they were all minor in a way, really. I mean, one big challenge, of course, was distributing the data, and at that time we barely had a World Wide Web. People could really not transfer data. The only way to transfer, it was even difficult for me here at Carnegie Mellon to transfer data from the computer science department, 500 yards away. We had to do it at night when the IARPANET was called.
Oh, wow.
The ARPANET, not IARPA, it was the ARPANET, and, certain Telnet. And so to transfer data from their computers to ours, so computer technology was really pretty bad. So what I did was actually make CD-ROMs, which I mailed to people. It was better than doing diskettes. Those little diskettes, I don't know if you know about that. Oh,
I am of that generation that was kind of my early.
Oh my goodness, yeah. Well, I don't even further back. When I got data from Bill Hall, it was on these 9-track tapes that you put on a huge thing. You mount it on the side of a DEC computer. So the technology was really pretty stinky.
Okay, that sounds like
that was probably, I would say actually that was probably the biggest challenge, was the bad technology, not the people. Well, of course, some people are not willing to share their data right away, and that has been an ongoing challenge. But fortunately, it's compensated by all the people who are willing.
Excellent. So this is something I've alluded to before. Childless is part of TalkBank, which is a suite of databases containing spoken language corpora. So I'd like you to tell us a little bit about TalkBank, as well as the future you see for Childless and other TalkBank projects.
Yeah, great. Yeah, I mean, I think that the success of Childless, either way, is really mirrored. A lot of people see that and they think, why can't we do that for our field? And one of them was aphasia. Audrey Holland, a great aphasia researcher, very much, life practices and life, trying to deal with aphasia. Said, why don't we get together? And we did, and we organized an aphasia bank, which is now having a huge impact across that field. Now, some of these other fields are a little bit smaller than child language. Another one that we recently started to enter is dementia, which turns out to be a huge field. Everybody really, unfortunately, there are many people, I hope not myself, who eventually will suffer from dementia. And language, it turns out to be one of the biggest indicators of the onset of dementia. So, we have now something like, I'd say, 800 computer science laboratories around the world who are using this data that we collected for dementia, because it's the only public access corpus in dementia that exists. One of the things I found is that if you can what is called buy-in from some of the major figures in a field, then it makes a huge difference, and that really has made a difference.
Yeah. Yeah, getting people to kind of start to lead the way, and then others.
Yeah. Well, I'm not an ephesiologist, not a, even conversation analysis. I've learned a lot about it, but there are people who really know that stuff. And so it's great to be able to work with them and learn about all these different areas of language. Gives you a much more feel for, how language really works. Yeah.
Fantastic. So I'd like to switch gears a little bit. As you know, I'm the media coordinator of IASCL, and I wanted to ask you some questions about IASCL. So you were president of IASCL from 1999 until 2001, I believe. And you've been involved in the organization in one capacity or another for decades. So I was curious about what your favorite IASCL memory is.
Yeah, well, there's so many. Of course, a boat trip on the Danube isn't bad in Budapest, but the one that really stands out to me, it was in Edinburgh, in this beautiful hall. I can't remember who it's named after, but this enormous hall, and we were listening to talk by Mark Hauser, who had just finished publishing this remarkable article, actually, which I really enjoyed, by Hauser, Chomsky, and Fitch, on the idea that there was a faculty of language narrowly defined, and that it really focused on recursion. Whereas there's these other aspects of language that are, present in other species, and birds can imitate, and chimpanzees maybe can gesture and so on, but no one else, no other species somehow has recursion. And Mark had just finished giving us a talk about morals, ethics in children, the development of moral. And I said, Mark, this, and I stood up and asked a question, an audience of 700. And I said, Mark, that's really interesting, and we love to hear about morals, but, a lot of us are interested in the idea that there's this fundamental aspect of language called recursion. And I wonder what you think about that and how it influences child language. And he said, well, Noam and I talked about that, and we threw that idea around, but I don't believe in that anymore. Sort of flabbergasted. But
Yeah,
it was. But of course, now I found out later that Noam still does believe in it. It's just that Mark doesn't believe in it anymore.
Okay.
It was, it's just to have an idea like that right in public, and it was, it's great. I love the exchange of ideas. And I think it's great that Chomsky continues to pursue that idea after there's probably a lot of truth in it.
Yeah, and IASCL is a great place to exchange ideas and challenge ideas as well.
Right.
So I know you attended the last IASCL Congress, which was held virtually in 2001. I was curious, what are you most looking forward to about meeting in person for the IASCL Congress next year in 2024?
I already mentioned the clock.
Yeah, definitely
the clock in the town square. Yeah, no, that's great. I guess a very selfish point of view, we have so many new capacities in Childs or in TalkBank, and I'm really excited to let people know about them. One of them, which we worked on for several years, got an NSF grant, is a thing called collaborative commentary. And this allows people to go into a transcript, which is on the web. You can, see this child interacting with their parents, and you can say, oh, the child's ignoring the parents, and they're having their own, ideas about what they want to play with. And then, or they're exploring the limits, of parental control, or they're having fun, with their friends, or playing with a toy, or whatever that child is doing. And so people can look at that different actions that a child has, or what the aphasic is doing in a conversation, and make these comments, and then other people can comment on their comments. And you can also use a coding system. So this is like really getting right to the data and actually almost touching it, I think, in a way. So that's what we call collaborative commentary. And no one had ever done this. And we built that system, and I'm using it in my classes. Other people are using it for their research group. So I really want to help people see that. And the other one is that we're suddenly being able to use automatic speech recognition. And so, how tedious it has been in the past to transcribe. I'm sure you, Katie, must know this.
Yes.
Sometimes take an hour of child language. It takes, 15, 20 hours to transcribe. It's just crazy.
Mhm.
And with ASR, we're able, maybe not the youngest kids, but as soon as a kid gets to about 4, file gets to about 4, and if you have good recording, you can just turn on the automatic speech recognition, it goes along, and you just maybe spend another 30, 40 minutes cleaning it up, but it's magic. So all of that, along with some other things that we've been building, trying to show how phonology, syntax, lexicon can all be unified across the different representations, fluency, and we build. So there's a lot of new technology, basically.
Very
So I'm a little
good.
selfish point of view, but I want to hear what other people have to say too.
Well, I think that a lot of people look forward to hearing a little bit more details, especially about this collaborative commentary. I think that's really interesting.
I think it could be great.
Yeah. So I had alluded to this earlier in my ChatGPT introduction. So you were the inaugural recipient of IASCL's Roger Brown Award in 2011. This year, or at the next Congress, 2 Roger Brown Awards will be conferred at the 2024 Congress in Prague, but also a new award, the IASCL Early Career Award, to honor more junior exceptional child language scholars. So I was wondering, as the inaugural recipient of the Roger Brown Award, if you have any advice for early career members of IASCL.
Yeah. First of all, I think this is long overdue. We had thought about initiating this, but pandemic came around and everything. But I'm really happy that we have this. I think that it's a great thing to do. We did have I think some awards for best posters and things like that. But really, old people like me don't really need any more awards. We need awards for the young people. I think it's a great idea.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so recommendations for young people. I actually met with some of our Carnegie Mellon students just last week, so it's topic still on my mind. And when I got there, what were your recommendations? And one of mine is to really seize opportunities that you have to keep you may find in your career barriers. Oh, you're always going to get a journal article rejected. I mean, I get my articles rejected. Don't give up, of course, send them back in, fix them up, make changes. But mostly there may be another opportunity to work with somebody, to learn a little bit more, to study a different kind of way of looking at things. So, I would say if you ever run into a barrier, don't give up on your thinking about the barrier, but don't perseverate on it and move over to another area where you can also make some progress. And I think doing 2 or 3 things at a time isn't a bad idea. And each one can then sort of advance a bit. And then you can return back to the other when it seems like maybe a new idea is coming to your mind. So opportunity, move into new ideas, but don't drop the old ones. So keep your strengths in your old areas and don't ever give them up or do a bad job on them, but keep your eyes open for new opportunities.
As my mother would say, don't burn your bridges.
Don't really, absolutely. That's a better way of saying it. Thank you.
Yeah.
Don't burn your bridges and find that other bridge where you can actually use your earlier abilities to sort of move over and have a little bit of leverage in this new area by bringing together ideas. New is great, but the question is, do you have an audience? The other thing is, of course, that you really want to have an audience. And sometimes issues become almost oversaturated. And you want to find that place where now something a little bit new, but building on your own strengths.
Yeah, making sure that you can shine.
Yeah, I think so.
Fantastic. I think that's great advice. So I have one final question to you. So we recently asked our followers on social media to vote on a final question to ask in this interview. And I'd like to thank those followers and pose to you the question that, to be honest, the overwhelming majority of them voted for. And that question is, what do you see in the future of language acquisition research?
Yeah, well, actually, we almost touched on that. And that is, I think that the relation with the computer is really going to be interesting, almost teaching the computer to act like a child. I think we can see that by providing these sensory feedback and understanding. As I've been really developing this idea that on the one hand, we do statistical learning, but on the other hand, we do meaningful learning. And the computers doesn't understand meaningful learning. So trying to help the poor computer, but also to see in the child how these things are playing back and forth. I mean, kids, the computer may take 100 cycles to sort of settle in on the weights for and be processing billions and billions of words, and the child can do it on the basis of 1 or 2 exposures to a new word. So there's something going on there where it filters down exactly what I wanted to learn. And so we need to understand what it is that when the child sort of clicks, and that's what I want to learn, and this is going to be something I relate to other ideas. At the same time, they are listening to all the phonotactics of the world. And that's making some kind of impression on the what we call cortical learning. So there is I think there are ways of understanding what statistical learning is without saying that all of it is statistical learning. So yeah, and as we get, the other thing, of course, is just to get better data. I've always, obviously, either preaching to the choir or preaching to myself here. So this sort of online recording, the ability to really have a monitor of the world, really. And as a child, I start to feel like a geologist. Or maybe somebody studying, the movement of the monarch butterflies. Yeah.
No, but I think that that's a great connection to how we started this interview, and I think that that's a great, wish for the future. And I think that
I think it will happen, actually.
That it'll happen. I totally.
We do have privacy concerns, and that is something we're going to have to deal with. And there may be ways of making an avatar on the video and so on, but you will have to, and it depends on people's own personal feelings, because people can give it, individual consent. So. We've got all the data from my kids, and they're very happy to have it out there.
Fantastic. Okay, well, that was my last question for you in this interview. So I'd like to thank you again for taking part, for being such a good sport. And I found this really enjoyable. Thank you.
Yeah, well, thank you, Katie. And we'll, look to see more from you too.